Joining me now to discuss last night's results is CBSN political contributor Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's a national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Caitlin.
Good morning.
So much to all right, so
yes.
Let's start with this. Christine Hallquist, the nation's first transgender gubernatorial nominee. What is the significance of this win, and what do you think her November race against the incumbent, what's that going to look like?
It is going to be a tough race. I mean, Vermont we think of as a pretty Democratic state, but there are also Republican strongholds. And of course, she's running against an incumbent, which is going to be a challenge in and of itself. But this really speaks to the diversity that the Democrats have been putting forth in terms of candidates and the history that she has already made and could potentially make in November. You're going to hear a lot of Democrats running across the country really highlighting that diversity in terms of transgender and women candidates and all sorts of different kinds of people who have been compelled to run for office and have seen openings and support for that.
You know, I couldn't help but think about Make America Great Again. So Republicans tend to be looking at, this is the America that we want it to look like this. The Democrats seem to be running on, this is the America we are.
Right, and it is really a reaction to the Trump presidency that we've been seeing all of these Democratic candidates feeling compelled to run. We've seen also more women running, at least for the Senate on the Republican side, but on the House side, in terms of congressional races, they're not reaching the numbers that we're seeing on the Democratic side, because Democrats are making this a priority of sorts and lending that support, whereas Republicans know that they kind of face those headwinds given the era of Donald Trump.
Well, it certainly was a night of firsts. Who else made history?
Well, it was a very interesting primary night. Of course, we had several primaries for congressional races. Also in Minnesota, a very interesting race to replace Keith Ellison, who, of course, just won the nomination for Attorney General in the state, a Somali refugee who could become the first, one of the first Muslim women to represent their states in Congress. That's a really interesting race to pay attention to. And there were a lot of other places. Vermont, of course, you mentioned, was a history-making one as well.
To criticize the president or not to criticize the president. That seems to be the challenge for a lot of these. I want to talk about the heated race for the open governor's seat in Minnesota. The state's former governor, Tim Pawlenty, came in second last night on the Republican side. He, in the past, though, has disavowed the president. Was that a risky move? Is that dangerous for the Republicans now?
I think that this race shows how much the party is now, at least at this point in time, the party of Donald Trump. Remember, Tim Pawlenty was, of course, a governor from Minnesota. He ran for president. He was kind of hoping to make a political comeback, left a very cushy, well-paying job in the private sector to make this comeback. And it turned out that, you know, despite all the money that he was able to raise and despite the profile that he had, the fact is that Republican candidates right now are depending on voters who support Donald Trump, at least in these primaries so far. And the fact that he was unsuccessful and the fact that he said that he is now really leaving politics, it kind of shows how much the party has changed.
You also mentioned Keith Ellison in his he won his primary in Minnesota, even after there were accusations of domestic abuse by his girlfriend. How much is that going to be used to bludgeon him in November? Right.
He won the nomination despite of that, but Democrats have been trying to run against Republicans kind of on this measure, of course. He is going to face some challenges, and I think that will kind of hover over him still. It's really interesting that he is leaving Congress, of course, to run for Attorney General. We're seeing several people do that this year, and that is also a reaction to the president, and to be able to use that kind of profile to expand, I think, is also a really interesting dynamic.
Yeah, in Wisconsin, there were 8 Democrats looking to unseat Governor Scott Walker.
Yes.
Who came on top of that?
This is a very interesting race because, of course, Scott Walker is very used to running tough campaigns. Remember, just a few years ago, he was recalled. This was a crowded Democratic field. Scott Walker has been ringing the alarm bells, though, for Republicans. Wisconsin, of course, is a state that Trump won, but very narrowly. And I've been talking to Scott Walker's campaign, and they've been trying to make clear to voters that this is not, they can't take anything for granted, especially in this environment. So you're going to see Scott Walker really really, talk about his support for the president, but also mitigate it with things that he's been doing in the state. And you're going to see lots of governors up for re-election this year try to thread that needle, try to separate themselves from Washington to the extent that they can, and really localize these races. And Democrats see lots of opportunity with that.
Yeah, there is, as they said, as Senator Sanders says, there is some energy there as well, but there's certainly energy on the Republican side. And I don't know about you, but it feels like these elections in November, they're important in and of themselves. A little bit of a foreshadowing of 2020, and it's already getting started here.
It's already getting started, and look at some of the endorsements that are coming from potential Democratic 2020 candidates. Of course, Bernie Sanders will be out there a lot. You're going to see a lot of these figures who are thought of as potential candidates in just a couple of years for president try to leverage their influence in some of these races to kind of expand their own profiles.
Here comes Iowa.
Never too early, I guess.
All right. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.